You're doing it wrong, completely wrong. Millions are diving into ice baths, following Andrew Huberman's protocols, believing they're optimizing their biology, but they're missing something infinitely more powerful. Carl Jung discovered it nearly a century ago, and what he found makes cold plunging look like child's play. But before you think I'm exaggerating, let me tell you what happened when I stopped following Huberman and started following Jung. What I discovered will completely change your perspective on personal transformation. Have you felt that frustration? You've been doing ice baths religiously for months. 2 minutes in the ice, 3 minutes, even 5. You feel the shock, the adrenaline, the dopamine rush afterward. Huberman promises it will transform your life. But so what? You get out of the ice bath, and you're exactly the same person, same fears, same limitations, same messy inner life. The ice bath becomes just another empty ritual. I know exactly how you feel because I went through it religiously. Every morning at 5:30 a.m., I'd plunge into a tub of ice. I timed it, I measured the temperature, I followed all of Huberman Lab's protocols, and it worked, partially. My cold tolerance improved, my morning energy increased, my focus sharpened during the first 2 hours of the day. All the benefits science promises were there, but something was missing. Something deep, something that would shake the very structure of my personality. That's when I found Carl Jung's private journals. Jung didn't do ice baths. He did something far more radical, something he called confrontation with the shadow through the primordial element. And what I discovered in those journals will shock you. Jung believed the cold wasn't just a physiological stimulus, it was a gateway to the unconscious. A way to force the mind to confront what it feared most. Not just physical discomfort, but existential discomfort. The terror of being who we really are. Let me explain the fundamental difference. When you do an ice bath the Huberman way, you're training your nervous system. When you do it Jung's way, you're reprogramming your soul. Jung's technique was simple, but revolutionary. Step 1, get into the cold water, but not just to endure the cold, get in to talk to it. Jung literally conversed with the sensation of cold as if it were a living entity, a rejected part of himself returning home. Step 2, don't try to control your breathing. Let the cold show you how you really breathe when you're afraid. Jung said, our breath in the cold reveals our breath in the face of life. If you fight the cold, you're fighting existence. Step 3, observe what thoughts arise. But not the thoughts about the cold, the thoughts about your life. Jung realized that thermal shock acts like a truth serum. When the body goes into a state of maximum alert, the mind stops lying to itself. Step 4, get out of the water. Only when you've learned something new about who you are. Not when the timer goes off. When the revelation arrives, this changes everything, because Jung wasn't interested in optimizing performance. He was interested in integrating the shadow, in transforming the human being from the inside out. The cold was merely the catalyst, and here's the secret nobody tells you. Jung tested this technique on hundreds of patients over decades. The results were so radical that he stopped documenting them publicly. He was afraid people weren't ready for what they might discover about themselves. But some cases leaked, and what leaked is disturbing. A Zurich businessman, 1935, he'd been doing Jung's technique for 3 months. On the 12th session, he got out of the water crying. Not from cold, from relief. He said he'd finally found the man who had been hidden inside him for 40 years. 3 weeks later, he completely changed careers. He abandoned business and became an artist. A London woman, 1938. She'd been practicing the Jungian method for 6 months. During a particularly intense session, she had what Jung called an integrated shadow epiphany. She realized her public personality was a complete lie, that she was living the life others expected, not the life she wanted. 2 months later, she divorced and moved to another country. Cases like this accumulated. People who entered the water as one version of themselves and emerged as another, completely different. Jung called this death and rebirth through the primordial element. The cold wasn't just strengthening the nervous system, it was killing false aspects of the personality and resurrecting authentic ones. And here's the part that will leave you uneasy. Jung stopped teaching this technique publicly in 1940. Why? Because some patients were changing too fast. Their families no longer recognized them. Their social circles disintegrated. It was too much transformation, too quickly. Jung realized he had discovered something dangerous, a way to dramatically accelerate the process of individuation, to force someone to become who they really were, not who they thought they should be. But some secret disciples continued practicing and refined the technique. Today, fewer than 200 people in the world know the complete method. I am one of them, and what I'm going to teach you now has never been officially documented. The true Jungian technique had 7 phases, not just get into the cold water, 7 progressive levels of confrontation with the unconscious through the cold. Phase 1. Confrontation with the fear of death. The cold water awakens the most primitive survival instinct. Jung taught not to fight this fear, but to observe it, to see how you react when you believe you might die. This reveals your true relationship with life. Phase 2. Dialogue with resistance. When the body wants to get out of the water, Jung taught to ask, why do you want to escape? What are you running away from in real life? Resistance to the cold mirrors, resistance to change. Phase 3. Integration of vulnerability. In extreme cold, all masks fall. You can no longer pretend to be strong, competent, in control. Jung said that this moment of total vulnerability was where real transformation began. Phase 4. Confrontation with existential loneliness. In the cold, you are completely alone. No one can help you. Jung used this forced loneliness to teach emotional self-sufficiency, to show that you can survive loneliness. Phase 5. Dissolution of the ego. When the cold becomes unbearable, the ego you have constructed temporarily dissolves. Jung taught us to observe who you are when you're no longer trying to be someone else. Phase 6. Conscious rebirth. As you emerge from the ice bath, you're reborn. But Jung taught the importance of conscious rebirth, of choosing who you want to be this time, not simply reverting automatically to who you were before. Phase 7. Integrating the experience. In the following 24 hours, Jung outlined specific techniques to integrate the session's revelations into daily life, to ensure the transformation wasn't merely temporary. This isn't just an ice bath, this is psychic surgery. And it works in a way Huberman can't even imagine, because Huberman is interested in optimization. Jung was interested in transformation. Huberman wants to improve who you already are. Jung wants to kill who you think you are and resurrect who you truly are. The difference is radical. When you do an ice bath the Huberman way, you emerge as an improved version of yourself. When you do it the Jungian way, you emerge as a different person. And here's what no one tells you about this difference. It's permanent. The effects of traditional ice baths last a few hours, maybe a day. The effects of Jung's technique last forever. Because you're not just changing your biology, you're changing your identity, but there's a price. Jung's technique requires you to relinquish who you think you are, to abandon your self-image, to accept psychological death to be reborn better. And not everyone is prepared to pay that price. That's why Jung stopped teaching publicly. That's why only a few hundred people in the world know the complete method. That's why you've never heard of it before. But if you've come this far, maybe you're ready. Maybe you're tired of superficial changes. Maybe you want real transformation. Maybe you're willing to discover who you truly are, not just optimize who you think you should be. If that's the case, what I'm going to teach you in the second part will change your life in ways you can't even imagine possible. Because I'll show you exactly how to apply the 7 phases of Jung's technique, step by step. No filters. No emotional safety nets. Real transformation is never safe. Jung knew this. Huberman doesn't. And if you're ready to discover the difference between optimization and transformation, between improvement and metamorphosis, between ice bath and rebirth, continue with me. Now I'm going to reveal something that changed my life and could change yours too. Jung's complete technique wasn't just about getting into cold water. It was a meticulous protocol of psychic transformation that he developed over 30 years. And I'm going to teach you exactly how to apply it. But first, you need to understand why Huberman will never teach you this. Huberman works within the paradigm of performance optimization. He wants to improve your dopamine, your norepinephrine, your stress resistance. He's interested in making you function better within the life you already have. Jung worked within the paradigm of individuation. He wanted you to discover who you truly are beneath all the layers of social conditioning. He was interested in making you live a completely different life. The difference is this: Huberman helps you be a better you. Jung helps you discover who you really are, and discovering who you really are might mean abandoning the life you've built so far. That's why Jung's technique is dangerous. That's why it was hidden. That's why only a few people in the world know how to apply it correctly. But you asked for the truth, so I'm going to give you the complete truth. Jung's method began with what he called the preparation of consciousness. You can't just jump into an ice bath and expect transformation. Your mind needs to be prepared for what it will find there. Jung taught that there are 3 layers of resistance you'll encounter in the cold water. The physical resistance, which everyone knows. The emotional resistance, which some discover, and the existential resistance, which almost no one crosses. Existential resistance is when you realize that getting out of that water means returning to a life that may not be yours. It's when you understand that the cold isn't the real problem. The real problem is the lukewarm life you were living before you entered the water. Jung discovered that the moment of greatest resistance in cold water isn't when you enter. It's when you have to leave, because leaving means returning to the lies you tell yourself every day. And here's the first secret of the real technique. Jung taught his patients not to leave the water until they had found a truth about themselves that they didn't want to admit, not a comfortable truth. A truth that hurts, because Jung knew that real transformation only happens when you stop running away from what you're most afraid of discovering about yourself. Let me tell you a case that Jung documented in his private journals but never published. A lawyer from Berlin, 1936, 42 years old, married, 2 children, successful career. He sought Jung because he was having inexplicable panic attacks. Jung taught him the cold water technique. In the first sessions, the man could only stay in for a few seconds. He said the cold awakened uncontrollable anxiety. Jung insisted that he stay longer, that he talk to the anxiety. In the 7th session, something changed. The man stayed in the water for 15 minutes. When he got out, he was crying. He said he had discovered something terrible about himself. He wasn't a lawyer by vocation. He was a lawyer because his father had been a lawyer. He wasn't married for love. He was married because that's what was expected of him. He didn't want children. He had children because society said successful men have children. His whole life was a performance, an interpretation of what he thought he should be. Jung noted that the man went home that day and could no longer pretend. He could no longer play the role of the successful lawyer. His wife immediately noticed that something had changed. She said it was as if a stranger had come home. 3 months later, the man divorced. He abandoned law. He moved to a small town in the Alps and became a carpenter. Jung lost contact with him, but years later he learned that the man was alive for the first time in 42 years. That's the real power of Jung's technique. It doesn't improve your life. It reveals what life you really want to live. And if that life is completely different from the one you're living now, you have a problem. Jung called this the problem of individuation. When you discover who you really are, you may discover that your whole life has been a mistake. That's why Jung's technique demands courage in a way that a traditional ice bath never will. Huberman demands physical courage. Jung demands existential courage. Now I'm going to teach you the exact protocol, but first, I need to warn you. Once you apply this correctly, there's no turning back. You can't unknow what you discover about yourself. Are you sure you want to continue? If the answer is yes, here's how to do it. Phase 1. Preparing the consciousness. Before entering the water, Jung taught a technique called the mask inventory. You sit in silence for 10 minutes and ask a simple question. Who am I pretending to be today? Not who you are pretending to be. Jung discovered that we all wear social masks all the time. The problem is, we wear these masks for so long that we forget they're masks. We start to believe we are the mask. The mask inventory forces you to consciously admit that you're playing a role, that there's a difference between who you are and who you're pretending to be. This is essential because the cold water will temporarily remove your masks. If you don't know you're wearing masks, you'll panic when they come off. Phase 2. Conscious entry. Jung taught that the way you enter the water reveals how you enter life. Most people enter cold water, struggling, rapid breathing, tense muscles, a resisting mind. Jung said these people live life the same way, fighting against everything they can't control. Jung's technique was different. You enter the water as if you were entering your own death, not fighting, accepting. Jung called this radical surrender. You don't try to control your reaction to the cold. You observe your reaction as if you were a scientist studying a rare species of animal. How does this animal called me react when it's afraid? How does it breathe? How does it think? How does it try to escape? This shift in perspective is fundamental. You stop being the person who is suffering and become the person who is studying the suffering. Jung discovered that this shift in perspective is the first step towards real freedom. When you can observe your reactions without completely identifying with them, you begin to realize that you are not your reactions. You are the one observing the reactions. Phase 3. Dialogue with the shadow. This is where Jung's technique becomes truly radical. Jung discovered that extreme cold awakens what he called the shadow, all the aspects of ourselves that we try to hide or deny. When you're in cold water, your civilized mind temporarily shuts down, and other parts of you begin to speak, parts you normally silence. Jung taught his patients to talk to these parts, literally. Hello, fear. Why are you here? What are you trying to protect me from? Hello, anger. Where do you come from? What are you fighting against? Hello, sadness. What are you crying about? What have I lost? This may sound strange, but Jung discovered that our psyche is like an inner family. Different parts of us have different needs, different fears, different desires. The problem is, in normal life, we try to silence these parts. We pretend we're a unified person with a clear will. But in cold water, these parts start to scream, and Jung taught that instead of silencing them, you should listen to them, because these parts have important information about who you really are and what you really want. Jung documented that patients who learned to dialogue with their shadow in the cold water began to understand desires and fears they had repressed for decades. One woman discovered she had anger towards her marriage that she had never consciously admitted. A man discovered he had a fear of the success he was obsessively pursuing. Another discovered he had a desire to create art, but was forcing himself to be a businessman. These discoveries changed entire lives. Phase 4. Integrating vulnerability. Jung taught that there's a difference between being vulnerable and accepting vulnerability. In cold water, you're forced to be vulnerable. Your body trembles, your mind panics, your voice may fail. You're out of control. Most people hate this feeling. They fight against it. They want to regain control as quickly as possible. Jung taught the opposite. He taught to dive deeper into vulnerability, to completely accept that you're out of control. Feel what it's like to have no control over your own body. Feel what it's like to be completely at the mercy of forces greater than yourself. Now tell me, where else in your life are you pretending to have control that you don't have? Jung discovered that our obsessive need for control is one of the greatest sources of psychological suffering. We spend enormous energy trying to control things that are uncontrollable. Cold water teaches a brutal but liberating lesson. You don't control almost anything, and that's okay. When you accept this completely, a strange peace arises. Jung called this existential surrender. It's not giving up. It's acceptance of reality. And from this acceptance, a different kind of power is born. Not the power to control the world, but the power to respond to the world in an authentic way. Phase 5. Dissolution of the ego. This is the most advanced and most dangerous phase of Jung's technique. When you stay in cold water long enough, something extraordinary happens. Your ego, the image you have of yourself, begins to temporarily dissolve. Jung discovered that the ego is like software running in your mind. This software creates a sense of self separate from the rest of the world. But this software isn't permanent, and extreme cold can temporarily shut it down. When this happens, you experience what Jung called oceanic consciousness. You're still conscious, but not as a separate person. You're conscious as part of something larger. Jung taught that this experience is one of the greatest gifts a human being can receive, because it proves that you are much more than you thought you were. But it's also dangerous, because when your ego rebuilds itself after the experience, it can rebuild itself in a completely different way. Jung documented cases of people who entered the water as one personality and emerged as another, not metaphorically, literally. Their values changed, their priorities changed, their relationships changed. It was as if the previous person had died and a new person had been born in the same body. That's why Jung stopped teaching this phase publicly. It was too much transformation, too fast. But for people who were truly ready, the results were miraculous. Jung wrote about a particular case that deeply impacted him, a Swiss businessman on the brink of suicide. He'd lost everything in a financial crisis. His family, his home, his reputation, everything. Jung taught him the complete technique. By the 10th session, the man experienced a complete dissolution of the ego. He remained in the ice bath for an hour. When he emerged, Jung said it was as if he were looking at a completely different person. The man himself reported a profound realization. He wasn't his successes or his failures. He wasn't his reputation or his wealth. He was something far more fundamental, far more indestructible. 3 years later, this man had rebuilt his life in a completely new way, not by trying to recover what he'd lost, but by creating something he'd never imagined before. Jung noted that this man had found what few ever do, his true identity. Not the identity society had imposed, but the identity he discovered within himself. Phase 6. Conscious rebirth. Jung taught that exiting the water was as important as entering it. Most people get out and immediately try to return to normal. They dry off, get dressed, resume their routines. They completely waste the opportunity for rebirth. Jung taught that there's a window of approximately 20 minutes after leaving the cold water where your mind is completely malleable. It's as if you're a newborn child, open to being reprogrammed. Jung's technique for this phase was simple yet powerful. You sit in silence and ask a question. Who do I want to be this time? Not who should I be? Or who do others expect me to be? Who do you want to be? Jung discovered that in this post-cold state, you access desires and ambitions, usually hidden in the unconscious. You can make choices about your identity that would normally be impossible. It's as if you have a chance to redesign your personality from scratch. Jung taught specific techniques to leverage this window. Visualizations, affirmations, commitments to yourself, not superficial positive thinking, but a profound restructuring of identity. Some of Jung's most dramatic cases occurred during this phase, people emerging from the ice bath and deciding to change careers, end marriages, move to other countries, start businesses, write books, create art. Not because they were running away from their lives, but because they'd finally discovered who they really were and what they really wanted. Phase 7. Integrating the transformation. Jung knew the ice bath experience was just the beginning. The real work happened in the following weeks. He taught that you have approximately 40 days to fully integrate the discoveries you made in the water. If you don't integrate, your mind will gradually revert to old patterns. Jung's integration technique was meticulous. Each day, you dedicate at least an hour to reflecting on the experience and taking concrete action based on what you discovered. If you discovered you were living the wrong life, you took a real step toward the right life. If you discovered you were suppressing emotions, you found healthy ways to express them. If you discovered new desires, you began to explore them. Jung taught that transformation without action is merely fantasy, and action without consciousness is merely compulsive behavior. Jung's technique demanded both, profound consciousness followed by courageous action. And here's the part that will surprise you. Jung discovered that people who applied his method correctly changed more in 40 days than other people changed in 40 years. Why? Because they were changing from the root, not trying to improve superficial behaviors, but transforming their fundamental identity. Now you know the complete method, the 7 phases of the most powerful personal transformation technique ever developed. But knowing the technique and applying the technique are entirely different things. Applying Jung's technique requires 3 things most people lack: the courage to uncover uncomfortable truths about themselves, the willingness to abandon identities that no longer serve them, and the persistence to integrate profound changes into daily life. If you have these 3 things, this technique will change your life in ways you can't imagine. If you don't, keep doing Huberman lab protocols. At least you'll get some neurological benefits. But if you're tired of superficial changes, if you're ready to discover who you really are beneath all the layers of social conditioning, if you want to experience what it means to live an authentically you life, then stop doing ice baths like everyone else. Start doing it like Jung.